A smart city is a city or a cluster which delivers value to all the stakeholders.
So welcome to the Blue Circle, and thank you very much for joining in. It's such a big privilege and a pleasure to reconnect with everyone, our distinguished panelists, some who've already joined us previously and some new who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience they bring in. And thank you to our distinguished audience for joining us. We've received over 200 registrations and 90% of whom are CEOs and CXOs. Many of them are repeat visitors, so this is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online modes as well. For those of you who are new with us today, the Blue Circle is an exclusive ecosystem to help business leaders manage disruptive times and become future ready. We focus on the 4 fundamental sectors, which are real estate and infra, healthcare, energy, and e-mobility. We also present socio-economic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. In the response to the COVID challenge, the Blue Circle has also accentuated its digital presence. One of the many modes we employ is our weekly webinar series across the 4 sectors, our digital publication. We're also building a hand-picked domain-focused expert pool drawn from among our leadership community or from our member base and its associates that will guide businesses during and post-COVID. In addition to this, and you'll be happy to know that we're shortly launching an exclusive digital platform, which will be the LinkedIn for leaders, wherein we will present them with the opportunity of connecting with people just like them, also house high quality curated content and meaningful conversations like we do. So those leaders who are interested, please do write to us. And the topic for today's session is reconfiguring cities in the new normal. Taking lessons from the past and learning from the present, how could we make our cities healthier, safer, more equitable, more productive, and more economical to run? We have invited prominent practitioners and thought leaders from the cohorts which are required to plan and make cities. Now, in the best interest of time, I will quickly just mention their respective names and designations. We have with us Ms. Jaya Dhindaw, Director, Integrated Urban Planning, World Resource Institute. Director, Dr. Nicholas Falk, Founding Director, URBED, and co-winner of the 2014 Wolfson Economic Prize. Dr. Rishi Bhatnagar, President, Aeris Communications. Mr. Sanjay Srivastava, CEO of Mahindra World City. And our moderator for the session is Mr. Pavan Choudary, author, CEO of Vigon India, public intellectual, and sits on several boards across the country. So welcome, sirs and ma'am. Thank you very much for joining. And kindly note that we will have Q&A towards the end of the session. Some of you have already shared excellent questions, and they're now with the moderator. So now I request Mr. Choudary to please begin the session, sir.
Thank you very much, Siddharth, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. It's a pleasure to have this very knowledgeable and very comprehensive panel here. Without much ado, let me just say that the origin of cities as well as the future of cities is shrouded in some mystery, in some fog. If you look at the origin of cities, though many people say that cities evolved because of thriving villages, but there is a very strong and effective counterpoint also, which Adam Smith and Jane Jacobs made. They said that it was the other way, that cities gave space and means for the agricultural productivity to go up, because cities provided the markets through their population clusters and technology improvement because of the opportunity they provided, as well as the intellectual systems they provided, where capital and intellect and scientists were coming together to discover new agricultural techniques, farm research, animal research, refrigeration, and so on. And they also found that agricultural productivity grew maximum when cities grew. And when cities fell, the neighboring villages also started shrinking in their economic output, as well as stopped thriving. So the past is also foggy, and so is the future, which is why I was very happy when Blue Circle looked at a list of people who are not only thought leaders but practitioners also in the planning piece, in the evolutionary piece, in the making of city piece, and in the technology which cities need today to grow. So such is our panel, and I will first go to Jaya to ask her, Jaya, as an urban planner, what do you feel how planning of cities has moved, and what are the various nodes on which this planning needs to concentrate now? Jaya.
Thank you so much, Pavan, and I would also like to thank Blue Circle for inviting me to this wonderful panel with all of my guests here. Well, I would like to start, Pavan, by kind of describing, where this whole notion of planning evolved from. And while we're in the middle of this pandemic still, and its impacts are still being understood, they're not clear about, how things will pan out for cities, for individuals, for communities. But it does seem that this will make an indelible mark for, several generations, this whole point of time. Now, how we plan our cities typically has always been a reflection of prevailing cultures or technological advances or even major crises. So, for example, the cholera epidemic in the 19th century sparked the whole introduction to modern sanitation systems. Then housing regulations around light and air were introduced as a measure against respiratory diseases in the overcrowded slums in Europe during the Industrial Revolution. So it's kind of strange, but we've kind of come full circle. The planning was evolved as a response to deteriorating health conditions, and now we are back in a health kind of a crisis again. And now this time, unfortunately, though, we haven't just come full circle, but we've come full circle with extra baggage. Because over the last several decades, we have created conditions that have accelerated climate change. And just to give you a sense of the magnitude of the problem that we're in right now, which we often don't understand, I just want to kind of give you a sense with 10 quick data points. So to start with, there are about 1.2 million deaths just from air pollution in India. We are building about 29 square kilometers is being added to cities. There is a $3.5 billion employee lifestyle cost to the IT sector alone, and a major contributor for that is stress. In Bangalore, 71% of the groundwater is unfit for consumption. Okay, workers in cities like Mumbai and Delhi lose 8 working days just sitting in traffic. 54% of India is water stressed. 20% of the waste generated, only 20% of the waste that we generate is treated, which means by 2050, we'll need a city the size of Bangalore 10 feet high to accommodate all of the stuff that's going into landfills. And essentially the 2-degree pathway to climate change, which we talk about, that, to the Earth, the global temperatures will rise by 2 degrees, and, to walk into that comfortably, 50% of building energy use consumption needs to be lowered, right? And there are things with, heat waves that are coming across India. And in 2015, there were about 2,300 deaths, and this just number is going to double and grow, right? The other alarming fact that I want to mention is that, India has some of the lowest per capita municipal budgets, which is comparable to many African cities like Nairobi and Mombasa and so on. So the point is that, how do we cope with all this while, engaging in good city planning? Now, 75% of India's 2050 infrastructure is yet to be built. Now, while that may sound alarming, it is actually an opportunity for us to build better. And how we build cities really does matter. And it's not about building new cities, but it is also kind of building back the cities that we are in and building them more sustainably. And just quick comparison points, Atlanta and Barcelona, 2 global cities, they have similar populations, about 2.5 to 2.7 million each. Atlanta has a land area of about 4,000 square kilometers. Barcelona is about 162 kilometers square. And the transport emissions per person in Atlanta is 7.5 tons. In Barcelona, it is 0.7 tons. So it is just the city form which has led to, this kind of good and sustainable, planning. Now, moving forward, the one thing that I would like to say is that we will have to look at not just economic growth and look at this whole migrant exodus that has happened and how do you bring that back, how do you bring the economy on track. It will entail job creation, skilling, better provisions for the informal sector and so on and so forth, but also environment in terms of how we consume resources and whether or not we put good circular systems in place, and also looking at health, clean air, water, energy, building systems, and then how do you provide access to all of this to everybody. So 5 things that I would say that we really need to focus on, in the coming sort of couple of years, because it's going to take that much to build and rebuild. 5 things. So one is, how do you provide access to urban services for all? And how do you close the service divide that currently exists, due to which a lot of this exodus actually happened during the COVID times? And that closing that divide is going to be a priority for cities. The second is affordable housing and public spaces. And how do you create and house all of these people that are very, the way housing policies have been executed in cities are to the disadvantage of the poor. And how do we make them poor? Yeah. The third thing is integrated blue-green spaces and a more holistic approach of combining natural and grey infrastructure. The fourth thing is city regional planning, because, as investments grow, we need to figure out how to have balanced regional growth, which attracts and enables investments. And finally, data and how do we use it. South Korea has a brilliant example in their response to COVID. So 5 things that I would like to stop here is talk about, evolution of cities. How do you bring in the equity perspective? How do you deal with density, which has kind of gotten a negative connotation, recently? Infrastructure, how do you provide it for everyone, and then mobility, and how do you ensure people can access jobs and services? So
Great. So basically what you have said, Jaya, is that disease has shaped the form of cities. Cholera epidemic brought zoning regulations, sewer systems. Similarly, TB epidemic brought the transit modes, etc. Second point which you have said is the ecological stress is enormous, whether it is in terms of climate change or pollution. And third, you have said is that the budget is very low. And you're right, only 0.75% of our GDP goes to cities where about 35% of our population lives. And lastly, you have tried to tie up in a succinct manner in the last 1 minute the 5 points on which the discussion should go forward. First is evolution, second is infrastructure, third is density, fourth is mobility, and fifth is equity. These are the points on which I will take the discussion forward now. And I go to Nicholas to ask him, what does he think about evolution, Nick? Evolution of the models around which cities have been planned. We would like to know from you, Nick.
Well, thank you very much. I think the first point is that cities are at what one might call a turning point, where they need to and are beginning to change direction because they are facing different challenges. The historic model of the city was that of people living in the suburbs and going into work in offices in the center or going to work at nearby factories. But now the cities are turning inside out. And in London, at least, the main office centers, the main shopping centers feel absolutely dead. And I think there's a whole shift now towards suburbs, which could be good or could be really bad. Because if everyone chooses to travel by car, and the cars pollute not just through their exhaust, but also through their tires, then the quality of life for those on the streets will become quite unbearable. And I think you're already in some Indian cities, Delhi and so on, are notorious for producing unlivable air. So in my view, that challenge of improving air quality is absolutely paramount. The second point I'd make is that cities don't just change in response to the need for sanitation. They change when there's something really urgent which causes people to rethink the way things are done. And in Europe, at least, it was the Second World War which produced a fundamental change of thinking. Suddenly, whole parts of our city were destroyed, rather as happened in Beirut a day or so ago. And the question was, what should be done? Now, if we'd have just left it to the owners of the land, I think they would have stayed derelict for decades. But instead, land was commandeered, and local authorities were able to take over the land and to service it, to put in infrastructure, to go enter into partnerships with private developers and rebuild. And we also did something which was inspired by our original Garden City model of creating new towns, to build on the away from cities in a planned way. And the key to the new towns wasn't the master plan, it was the process which enabled the value from the land when it's accessed, when the planning permission is given, to enable that to be plowed back in the infrastructure. In my view, we face another war on many fronts. In fact, so many fronts, many people are losing confidence, I think, in the ability of government to plan for a better life. And that's a huge change since when I grew up, when people felt that things were getting better every year, thought that technology was making life good for all. So in my view, we have a need for a different kind of planning from the one that we've had up till now. A planning though system which is much more like that used in Northern Europe, in Germany or Denmark, Scandinavia generally, which is good for the economy because it enables businesses to innovate and grow, and it's good for people because it makes housing more affordable, including the use of cooperatives to manage housing so that people can share facilities. So the big question I think one should be asking is not just what planning system is needed, but what development system is needed to commandeer land so all the benefits don't just go to those who happen to own it, but are fairly shared.
Excellent, excellent point, excellent opening. In fact, what you have said is whether we should have suburban sprawls or urban cores is one point we have to look at. Dense centers also have many things going for them. They are socially cohesive, more vibrant, anti-obesity, anti-climate change because mobility is not required like that, as well as extremely productive economically. And suburban sprawls, which we might be leaning towards because of the crisis in dense centers, might give you light, space and air, but it may leave you devoid of people and have desolate public spaces. So also, perhaps what you have alluded to is that there are certain dense centers like New York and Mumbai, which have fallen badly to COVID, but there are certain other dense centers like Hong Kong and Seoul, which have handled COVID very well. So it is perhaps not density which is making us vulnerable, but greater economic inequity or poor city management.
Yes,
Given
and can
these
I just say one other thing, which is, in my view, the great underused resource, apart from land and sometimes buildings, is the transport system, the railway system, because the thing about railways is they don't have to compete for space with people on foot or bicycles or whatever. So it seems to me paramount importance that we make the most of railway connections, and not just for one train a day, but for regular, affordable trains, which can then connect up with housing existing and new. And it's the planning of infrastructure and also, of course, water, which is so critical to Indian cities together, which is the great thing that's been missing in Britain at least, but which is done so well in Germany or France or Scandinavia.
Very good point. So coming to you, Sanjay, given what Nicholas has very beautifully said, that choosing between urban sprawls, suburban sprawls and urban cores may not be so easy. How do you feel smart cities will fit in? Because most of the smart cities are going for newer areas, or are you also looking at smartening up existing cities, existing frontiers or facets of mega cities? Are you planning to smarten up? Sanjay.
Thanks, Pavan. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone. Thanks the Blue Circle for having me. In fact, in the participants, I see a lot of my good friends and business associates. So a big hello to everyone. So as always, Jaya and Nick have set such high standards. Now it is left to practitioners like us and Rishi to really make their vision get true. So
Yeah.
it's the perfect platform. But having said that, I think the points which both of them made and what you augmented, Pavan, if we step back and we really see what does all of this mean, I think if you look at it in a very simple manner, this pandemic is just one of the examples. Whether there have been pandemics in the past, there have been various other disruptions. So I think the cities which are successful or eternal cities are the one, if I really have to see what is one unique thing, it's very simple. They are resilient cities. They are cities which are almost like a alive human being, which adapt to the expectations of the stakeholders, the citizens, the country, the economy, take care of whether pandemic, whether it's a war or a disruption, natural or otherwise, but still comes up. And whether such cities will survive, it's very difficult to say in a day or in a minute. In fact, at Mahindra World City, we say even in today's fast-paced world, it takes a decade to be an overnight success for a city. So I just wanted to put that in perspective. And why for not just for India, but anywhere else, why the scale of problem as well as the opportunity is huge. If I just pick up in India, while we talked about the areas, but if I give a more tangible example, because finally cities is about people and what happens. Till about 2 years back, we were about 32% urbanization and about 65% of the economic value coming in from the urban centers. In the next under 2 decades, this number is going to move to about 50%. So effectively in number, we are supposed to be creating, and this is just one country, India, we are supposed to be creating a responsible urban centers for equivalent population of a USA equivalent 300 million. So that is the kind of scale which we are looking at. So if that is the kind of scale, whether we look at a combination of greenfield or brownfield, I really see 3 important aspects which we have learned in our 2-decade journey on creating the world cities, Mahindra world cities, which are benchmark in global benchmark in themselves. The first and foremost, I'll pick up the key parameters given by Nick and Jaya. And if I have to just summarize in 3 simple words, I'll say it is about having a integrated planning and execution of 3 L's: livelihood, living, life. If you are the reason you are able to create an economic nerve center, whether you create near urban, whether you create in rural, or you create a new field. If you are able to create a livelihood, there's an incentive and a reason for anyone to come in. So first is the livelihood. When people will come work, they would need a good quality housing and other residential premises. That's where the living comes in. And in living, the important aspect is you need to have living applicable for all strata. So that is the second lever. And the third, I'm sure all of us have been discussing, pandemic notwithstanding. Ultimately, human being is a social and a cultural being. So you need elements of culture, life, coming in to really feel alive. You want to visit something, the passion or hobby may be different, but fundamentally every one of us wants to go somewhere which gives a higher vibration. So therefore life. So first I will come to the three most important aspects, which is an integrated approach to the three L's. The second very important aspect, I think some of it was touched. And these are all which we have done. Maybe I'll come later into detail how it is done. The second important aspect, sustainable and inclusive development. When we say sustainable, it goes much beyond green. It actually goes about having a responsible development, that you have a long-term roadmap of how, not just how resources are being used now, but how resources will be used and consumed, and what is your planning, where you have a long-term roadmap, but you are nimble enough to adapt to the short-term circumstances. And inclusive, very important, because inclusive is not just being for all, but also taking the views of all. And you all talked about the smart cities. You know, the first few smart cities which were off the block, there was a publicly available scoring rating. The first 3 or the first 20 were the ones where the citizen stakeholder involvement was the max, and they scored very highly of it, because ultimately it is the citizens which define the city. So that's why I define it a much broader definition of inclusiveness. So inclusiveness of all the stakeholders, what is their expectation and how it will flow. And then the third aspect is a smart city, as you talked of, goes much beyond, in our world, beyond a realm of using technology. We will say that a smart city is a city or a cluster which delivers value to all the stakeholders. To the companies, it is, can you really create economic growth? Can you really scale your business operations? To the workers who are coming, can you really give them a world-class infrastructure where they feel happy to come in? To the residents and the other visitors, as Jaya talked of, do you have an integrated public space that people's quality of life really gets enabled to level next? So if you look at the 3 L's of livelihood, living, life, you look at sustainable and inclusive development, and you look at delivering value to all the stakeholders, that is really a city which is smart than the smart cities. I'll take a pause here and hand it over to you.
Very comprehensively spoken. You have spoken about resilient cities, which OECD also speaks about, where they say that if a city can recover from economic, environmental, social, or institutional shocks, then it is a resilient city. And I'm sure in environmental, the health shocks also should be accommodated. The second point which you have made is about livelihood, living, and life. And yes, cities actually improve your livelihood, not only by providing you employment, but it has been seen that the bigger the city, depending on a particular quantum, the higher are the wages. And third point which you have brought about is equity, where right now cities have 50% of the population living in 8 to 10% of the area, which is quite inequitable and causes a lot of problems. This, not only should they get their share, but also their views should be incorporated in the development of the city. So great. So coming to Rishi, now the technologist today has a big challenge. How to incorporate all these different views and do this in a systematic manner and more efficient manner. So I would like to know from you, IoT, which you specialize in, how is it making cities more efficient, more economical to run, and can they also play a role in making them more equitable? Rishi.
Thanks, Pavan, and thanks, Blue Circle, for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure. I have been here before with my friend Sanjay. It's going to be a much better discussion. Pavan, it's not we at Aeris, we are an IoT company, 2 decades of experience working on smart cities. Before that, I used to work for Tech Mahindra, and there I worked very closely with Sanjay's Mahindra World City. We implemented number of use cases for a smart city, from smart street lights to smart water management, to smart parking, smart this, smart that. But the main basis, Pavan, was to how to have a centralized command and control center, okay, where all the data can come in from different sensors. And
sorry, just to interrupt you, for the sake of the uninitiated in the audience, please describe an integrated command and control center, and then next.
Okay, basically, Pavan, it's a centralized command and control center. Okay, sometimes you feel that there are different kind of use cases, and different kind of use cases needs to implement and give data to different sources. Just for the sake of example, a municipality in a city works to collect the garbage and clean the garbage, whereas the traffic police works on managing the traffic. Okay, this police for security also does get data to manage the security. Can they all three work from a single camera? Okay, and how can I have a centralized location where I get data from different sensors in the whole city and try to see, okay, this data is required by the municipality to get the garbage collected. This data is required for the transportation to say there is a huge traffic jam and you need to take a different route. Or if there is a theft happening or something has been stolen, how can the same camera provide data to the police department to catch hold of something to be caught at the next red light? Okay, and this is just one example of a camera as a data collector. Or this can be for anything, but how can I have a centralized platform where data coming from different sources of sensors and devices can be utilized for different functionalities? Because in a city, you have a water department, you have electricity department, you have a health department, you have a municipality, you have a police department, and they all have their own functions. That means there is a need for a city level governance, which needs to be collectively done. And that's what we specializes in. Our platform provides that single platform, and we got award for that. And we were able to get all the data in a single platform, which can be monitored. And there can be a number of examples, and many cities now have started implementing those centralized command and control centers. And we have those solutions available. How to take the existing infrastructure, how to take from the existing infrastructure, Pavan, I mean, sometimes you feel that, the light pole, okay, for me, that light pole is an access to electricity power. And what all I can do on that pole to get as much data as I can, because I have access to electricity and an infrastructure that is standing at a height. Okay, so how to use the existing infrastructure to collect data for different institutions, different organizations which are trying to manage the city is something what we do as a centralized command and control centers. Okay, that's one part, Pavan. But the main thought which I wanted to discuss as a technologist, there are 2 kinds of cities that are getting smarter, or we are trying to make them smarter. One are the greenfield, something which is very similar to what Sanjay and his team has done in the Mahindra World City Jaipur, which is a new, I think, 3,000 plus acres of land and creating a new well. But how can you do Delhi? How will you change Gurgaon? How will you change Faridabad and the many other cities which are having their own issues and challenges? They were created, must be somebody had planned, I don't know. But there are cities where there is no sewage system. There are cities where there is no water pipes. Okay, and there are so many other challenges which we are trying to fix. And for those kind of cities, the technology gets challenged. And we need to find solutions for them. And that's where, we are currently working on seeing how can we make things better. But Pavan, the pandemic, because the topic was more of, the future of, how the pandemic will impact. And I have a different thought altogether, which I had a short discussion with you last time. Since last 4 months, I have not gone out of my home. Okay. My children are studying at home. They are not going to the schools. Okay. The colleges are closed. So the first priority of all of us right now is health and safety. And how can we secure ourselves and our family from this pandemic? Okay. And that has allowed, I am not opening, I am a CEO of a company. I am not opening my office for my team, because I can do everything from work from home. Change is required because the service providing companies are working efficiently with similar productivity by not even allowing their people to come to the office. And currently, Pavan, I just want to share this. I'm not sure how much people will be able to appreciate. The manufacturing companies got locked down completely, whereas the services industry continued during the lockdown, during the pandemic. Suddenly, the amount of requests which we are getting as an IoT company to make the current manufacturing plants remotely monitored, managed is much higher, because they are also believing that if you are able to manage your infrastructure remotely, they will be able to face the future pandemics better. I just want to say, Jaya mentioned that during the cholera outbreak, the sewerage system started. You were mentioning about the TB, the environmental thing started. This is a digital revolution which will accelerate because of pandemic. Okay. I'm very happy. My business will grow because everybody will ask, how can they implement digital IoT solutions? How they can start using the data? How they'll be able to take decisions better from the data, whether it is health, safety, which will become priority, whether it's mobility, equity, density, everything. And how can we use the existing infrastructure? That's what my first submission, Pavan.
Great.
If you want to.
Great.
Yeah.
Very good point. So you explained the integrated command and control center, like a Houston style space control center, where there is information coming from various sensors and cameras on many screens, and you can use these linkages and interchange between departments this information for more efficient monitoring. The other point which you said was that IoT really can help a lot, and Barcelona, the city which Jaya gave an example of, is actually a testimony to the fact that in garbage disposal, in parking, in use of water and electricity, etc., they have saved millions of dollars per annum, tens of millions of dollars actually. The next question which comes is regarding data privacy, security, collection, as well as the cost of collecting data. Where will the money come from? And I'm going to come to with that question to you, Jaya. Where will the money come from for all this collection of data, and how will we ensure data privacy and security? Because as you only said, that the municipalities or city governments are extremely poorly funded, as well as they are not credit worthy. They cannot raise loans or from the market. So that is one question. And the second point which I would like to make to complement what Rishi said, that for many of us, work from home is a boon, because our homes are good. And there are also many people who are living in just one room, and 7 or 8 of them living in a hovel. So the reality is a little different for them. And secondly, also, there are certain aspects of the economy, not only manufacturing, which can do well with smart manufacturing tomorrow, but what will happen to upskilling and reskilling of those people whose jobs will go because of smart manufacturing, plus the healthcare sector also, which has been hit very badly in terms of footfalls not only footfalls of patients, but footfalls of nurses and doctors, because nurses migrated, and the doctors who are more than 60 years, who are the star doctors, they are not being able to attract people through their presence for the elective surgeries. So that sector is also really shaking. So surely pandemics change the course of cities, but we have to make very sure that when the course changes, maximum people's affairs and plight is taken into account when we change that course. Jaya.
Okay, so so Pavan, as I understand it, you want me to address two specific things. One is in terms of data and who pays for it and who pays for what the city collects, what we do with it. And the second is density, if I've understood you correctly, and how.
Data and the fact that the work from home piece is good for many people, but it may also be irrecoverable for many other people. Right. So what kind of urban design will make sure, let us say, that factories or hospitals or schools are distributed throughout the urban tissue rather than being concentrated in one area where people hesitate to go because of the congestion, and also people are encouraged to go to these small micro centers because they feel that they may not be so contaminated, and any other part of planning which should get influenced by this inclusive view of how people have been affected by the pandemic. Jaya.
So Pavan, I'll answer your second question first. I'll go with the part about how whether or not this decentralization will happen. How will we respond to that? So one thing I think before starting out we should be very clear about is that cities exist for efficiency, and that is why they're successful, right? So whether it is efficiency in supplying services or in efficiency when it comes to dealing with an emergency like a pandemic, I think so cities basically are agglomerations of people, but they're also agglomeration of ideas, right? So cities will continue to exist. And in fact, the Delhi NCR region is going to become the biggest in the world, in the globe by 2050. And I don't think that this current pandemic is going to hamper that or is going to derail that from happening, right? So that is one thing. At the same time, I think what we are doing very, very consciously is trying to figure out how to bring in greater manufacturing capabilities in and around cities, so that cities are not just consumption hubs, but they're also production centers, right? And how do we create those production centers? Now for Delhi or Mumbai or Bangalore or whatever, you can't put those production centers in the middle of the city. That space is already taken, that land is already gone. Whether the right densities exist or not is a separate debate, but there isn't land. So what's happening is that a lot of these clusters will basically evolve outside of these cities in the format of satellite townships. One such example, which I really think is a good one, is Rajarhat, Newtown, Calcutta, right? So it is fantastically, it was positioned, it was well planned, it has the social and cultural infrastructure present so that the people who live there can, have a good life. Going back to the point that Sanjay was making, and many such clusters will come up because as investments keep coming into cities, because we're going to be increasing our own production capacities and other such things, these kind of clusters will evolve, the satellite townships will grow. And the point is that how do you keep them connected to the main city, to other metropolitan areas, right? And I think a great example in that respect is the Pearl River Delta area, right? Where all cities above 1 million have been connected by high-speed rail. So you can literally live anywhere. You can live in one city, you can commute to another city for work, and that has been done very successfully. So the way this can be enabled is through good regional connectivity. And I think Nick was bringing the point about how do you use your railways better, right? And this is one opportunity to do that. So that's on the connectivity and how this new paradigm will emerge. There will be satellite towns. They will still be near the major metropolitan areas because of the agglomeration economies and for the kind of talent pools that exist there. And so we just need to figure out a way how to make that work. The second point about data, I think, who pays for the data, and with our sort of cash-strapped municipalities, I think the main thing is how do you bring in the private sector into the fold of all of these conversations? I mean, one, they come in with two things really. The private sector is coming in with innovation, whether it's a solution to a problem, a gap that exists, or a process. And the second thing that they're coming in with is money, and they're ready to offer both of these up, for the public sector to take advantage of. And I think we need to become better about finding ways to incentivize that, and to see how we can use that for, taking the granular level data, for analyzing it, to inform city planning, to inform, better infrastructure and equitable access to infrastructure in cities. And I think we just need to find ways to work better, build the trust with the private sector, between the private sector and the public sector, to make this happen. And in terms of the privacy, I think that is a huge question. That is a lingering question. How do you ensure that? We've had lots of things, and lots of things have kind of fallen apart. But I think the privacy is the other thing, is that you need to have this whole kind of a framework around what kind of data will be accessible to whom, and how do they therefore get to use it. But I think we need to use centralized data, because we have dichotomous data coming in from cities. Today, if I try to see simple things like roads in a city, 5 different organizations will give me layers that don't match up, right? So how can I have one system and something which is, where the sharing protocols and all of those are defined better, so that all users can access some of that data?
Great points, very good points, Jaya. So you have said that cities will exist and grow because why they happened in the first place, all those points have not gone away. Whether it is economic success, or it is production hubs, or it is the socio-cultural hubs which they provided. However, maybe another layer may come in there, a security layer. Another level of security, so that we do not contaminate each other, etc. That may come in, and I agree with you. And on the role of private sector in bearing the data collection cost is an interesting point. On data privacy, also you have kind of hinted towards anonymizing and aggregating of data. And so when you aggregate data and you make it anonymous, then it is not an infraction on privacy. And when you hold it for some time only and then leave it or release it, so then also that privacy piece is also taken care of. So we will of course also have to see that the government does not overreach when it gets all this data about us. And what is needed for a crisis does not become a normal demand of the government, and it is not misused. Great points. Also, I feel that Rishi's point that data privacy, I feel data privacy is a side effect of technology. And we will find the technology to get rid of this side effect also. Blockchain is one such technology. Coming back to Nicholas. Nicholas, given what Jaya has said, where do you think, she also spoke about the mobility piece, that how mobility can make sure that cities grow more equitably and more in a more balanced manner. Where do you think the progress is on this part, the mobility, as well as on the financing of cities? How can cities be financed better?
Well, we've got some big problems, but I believe you solve big problems by breaking them down into small chunks. And in my view, the building block, the crucial building block, is the neighborhood and what we call the sustainable urban neighborhood, or SUN. And I think I would start with groups of around 20-25 families or households, because I think that's big enough to really create a sense of community, but small enough to be manageable. And I think the vehicle for that is some form of cooperative, and what we call in the States, USA is called community land trust, so that you have some body that can take over land and provide some shared facilities. Now, those can include sharing mobility, sharing cars, sharing a small bus or whatever. so that one makes it possible for a community, a neighborhood, to work effectively together. And one of the benefits we found of the epidemic has been that there has been a degree of sharing, kindness, as people do help each other out. So I think there is that basic human quality, if only we make it possible. What makes it feasible is the technology of IT. We've all discovered how we can communicate across the sea even, using webinars and so on. And it seems to me that that will stick with us and will enable all sorts of people. Rishi was talking about schooling, and I can see all sorts of groups hang on by sharing common interests, even though they're not living next door to each other. Now, I think once that becomes possible, and I realize that not everyone has a smartphone, but at least if you have a hub, you can then get access to a computer that's connected up. It seems to me that one can then really add to what I call the commonwealth. In other words, instead of just thinking of private wealth or the poor local authority or public sector, let's think about building up the commonwealth, which after all creates the very best cities that we love. We talk about Barcelona or Copenhagen or whatever, and it's worth remembering they weren't always successful. In Barcelona, they had a terrible civil war. If they've been successful, it's because of this ability to collaborate. And as I say, now you can use the internet to keep in touch with people who share common interests. So I think we use those for building communities, as I hope we're going to be doing in Tirunelveli, where I've been working with an organization called SCAD, Social Change and Development. But it's not multiplying it up to thousands, it's doing it with a series of small steps, which then get accumulated and over time produce the very agglomeration effects or cluster effects that Jaya was talking about.
Excellent point. You have said that we have to look at commonwealth. Like, for example, when we live in condominiums, we pool our resources together to have a high quality of life. So why can't we pool our resources together within the city to have a higher quality of life for the entire populace? Will it mean sharing our wealth with people who are not like us socio-economically or culturally? Perhaps. And then we have to overcome those barriers or those acquisitive barriers which prevent us from doing so. So Sanjay, would you like to add? And I'll also come back to Rishi, because you have spoken about another upcoming trend, which he would have loved to hear, which is homeschooling. So I'll come back to that, Rishi, so that you get your chance at the pitch. Sanjay, adding to this concept which Nicholas has advanced, commonwealth. What else can be the way of financing cities, as well as ensuring that whatever finances are entrusted to the management of cities are more prudently and responsibly used? Sanjay.
Hi, thanks, Pavan. In fact, very valid point, and I go back to a conversation. Often we have to learn from history to analyze and see what does the future hold. What we often call is, you actually look in the rear view mirror to see what is coming, and at the same time you should look at the windshield, so where is the future headed. So if I combine that, and maybe a lot of us are from a corporate background, how I would say is, in fact, one of my very good infrastructure experts often says that conglomerates consist of divisionalized companies. I will apply that philosophy to the philosophy of the cities of today. It is about how can you really create clusters which can serve all the purpose, but at an aggregate level there is some uniformity, because the specific customization has to be done at an individual cluster level, resources level. There may be states which or cities which are amenable for a particular kind of maybe manufacturing or services, or the kind of skill set which is available. So I think it is about how you have a common thought process and then go down. So for doing this, Jaya briefly talked about the private participation, but I think it goes much beyond private participation or a public-private cooperation. It goes down to identify what is the need, where you will apply and use the resources, both financial and non-financial, in a very responsible manner. So there is a sustainability, and sustainability means there is an economic value sustainability. If there is no business case, as Rishi was talking about, who's going to take the smart city solutions? If there is no sustainability, you are not generating enough economic output. Beyond a point, the government will come back that why do you have these cities which are like ghost town, and there are enough countries very large where you can see some of that coming. And the economic value, that why should I as an individual or I with my family should really go it, whether 20 kilometers away or 200 kilometers to a new place if that's not there. So we have learned this very well when we created this our Mahindra World Cities. So there are three things which you need to do. If you do these three benefits right, the financial model comes in, the economic model comes in, a quality of life comes in. First, you need to ensure whether it is execution or whether it is about a company going live, you have to give them a faster time to market. In today's world, no one has time forever. So can you actually do such a good planning that a company, an individual or a visitor can quickly go on and do what's their job? Second, we talk of a EODB at a very high level, at a policy level, but really it is about how can you give EODB in operations or living. So can you make people's life easy? Can you make companies the business case easy? So it goes to about EODB in operations and real life. And the third thing, I connect back to the point which many of us has made. It's about business continuity and resilience. And when we talk about business continuity and resilience, we don't have to look at only a pandemic or a disruption. The very term business continuity means that even on a sustainable basis, as we evolve, new requirements will come. Rishi gave an example that till yesterday there was some requirement of a smart city, today there's another requirement of her. But you cannot, as we will speak to the favorite thing, you can't fix a flying aeroplane. So you need to actually, if you can't fix a flying aeroplane, you need to ensure once the flight takes off, it is equipped to handle the weather, the storm, the whatever comes to start from start to the destination. So that is how an integrated ecosystem has to have all of this. Whether it really played out in actual, luckily, and through sheer planning it does. And while all of us are talking about the lockdown, to give a very granular example, the two world cities were the only two integrated cities in the whole of India which were actually operational even during the pandemic, because as and when eligible companies, whether it was the medical devices, essential services, some of the food and food supplies, they needed it. Because all of this resilience was built in on an integrated system and was not being trying to be customized as and when it had done. And in fact, as a result, you are aware, but for the sake and benefit of all our participants, in fact, now these kinds of cities, whether what we have done or even across in Western Europe and some of the other places, or Hong Kong and some parts of Korea you talked of, they are being showcased at this is the right model for today and as well as tomorrow. So the value proposition is now here and now. In fact, it has become more pronounced.
Great. So you spoke about EODB, which is ease of doing business, and you said that we should focus on EOLL also, which is ease of living life. Maybe that can be a new acronym. The other point which you said was also equally interesting. You cannot fix a flying aeroplane, but you can refuel a flying aeroplane, as we saw in the case of Rafale as they were coming to India. So perhaps there is hope there. And I come now to Rishi for his last words on what Nicholas said regarding homeschooling as a trend, and what else do you think is going to change past this pandemic, other than work from home, which you also already spoke of passionately. Rishi.
Pavan, I know the time limit is done, and we are overshooting our time. But I just want to share two more points before I answer what can be the next. One is on the data privacy. You had asked this. Okay. United Kingdom came out with the GDPR laws. Okay. And on a similar line, India came out with something similar on the data security and privacy. And a law is supposed, it was approved by the cabinet in 2018. It has still not seen the parliament, but we are expecting that this year we will have the Data Privacy and Data Security Act as a law in India, and a data security regulator or data privacy regulator will come into existence. Okay, that will be a big step with a legal framework coming up in terms of how you can take data, how can you use data, and so on and so forth. So that will be one thing which the government of India is already working on, and we expect at least in this year we'll have that as a law and a regulatory body coming into existence. Second point you were asked, which Sanjay also mentioned, is the PPP model. And when you try to create a centralized command and control center for individual use cases or group of use cases, you are able to ask a private player to work on. And how you get budget and how you get a business case out of it. You know, the traffic information, the transportation information that can be used by many other agencies which we are not thinking right now. You know, I don't want to get into details of how data can be gold mine, which everybody is talking about, what data is the next oil and so on and so forth. But we have not been able to consider how you can monetize your data and who all will pay for it. So, you know, once you are able to do it and you have that idea, people will be able to utilize that amount of data you will be able to get from, you know, if I sometimes think the 1.2 billion people's biometric data of Aadhaar, can the eye pupil be used by the healthcare department for checking how the eye treatment can be done? The answer is yes. How the biometric of your fingers can be utilized to do something? Yes. So on and so forth. So the data is a real goal. Talking about what all new things that can happen. I am currently working with the government of India on the national digital health standards. Okay. So the whole healthcare will move into home. Okay. You will only go to hospitals for a very, very specialized problem, or maybe for a specific operation or something. Otherwise, everything else can be at home. From schooling to healthcare, and I've already told the work. Okay, I see, you know, majority of the things will happen from home. And other thing, Pavan, if somebody can virtually take me to Goa, okay, or to Tirupati Balaji's temple, I am happy to pay. Okay, so the virtual reality of in the case of travel or tourism, or in case of games, in case of, you know, FIFA or the IPL, these are the next level where people will go as per the digital or pandemic next steps. That's what my thoughts are.
Superb. What a brilliant ending. Data privacy, you have spoken about that the law is coming, and that is very important because data privacy ensures our political freedom. If our data gets out, or if knowledge about us which we would not like to share gets out, we lose our political freedom. Great point. Second point on which you have said the private-public partnership. I know you and I both have our doubts also on that, because we know that PPP, as it is short formed, is sometimes TPP, which is Tali Pito Party. Because many a time the feudal outlook of the government and the extremely enterprising outlook of the private sector do not match, and there are issues there. Plus, the government is not very efficient at allocating of resources and also their efficient use. The third point which you made was really the very fine point. You said that you're talking about data collection cost. Why don't you talk about data monetization possibility? And because whatever we are doing, whether we are going on any site or purchasing anything, this is our digital you. And this is all not with us right now. It is with companies which are in the internet space, etc., e-commerce space. All this are digital crumbs which we leave as we travel through life should be our own possession, and blockchain companies, some are working on making it our possession. So we will decide who to allow it to be used by and at what cost. That's when the money comes to you that you can share with the city for the development of the city, or the city can take some part of it. And the last point which you said, that home care, yes, 1/10 of the cost and of healthcare in the hospital. And virtual reality you spoke of, I would really like to go to a very congested temple virtually only. So I prefer that than to going physically. That is also a possibility. And the last thing which I would like to say, just to complement what you have said, Rishi, and you have so beautifully summed it up, is that change is far-reaching. Doesn't mean that everything will change. When the internet came, it was said that now all selling and buying will happen on the net, that all the schooling will happen on the net. Yes, it did, but schools also remained and malls also remained. And I feel after some time, after adding a level of security through sanitization or through a vaccine or through a therapeutic remedy, we will realize that those things which we feel might completely change also remain. So that is what I think is the collective view of the group. But I really thank you very much, Rishi, for bringing a contrarian view that livened up the debate and allowed different colors to splash on the canvas. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you all the audience who has stayed with us again for so long. And many of you are repeat travelers with us. We really value that also. And I hope we have covered the questions which came in our talk track navigation. Siddharth, it is over to you.
Thank you very much, sirs and ma'am, and thank you for summarizing so well, Mr. Choudary. Our leaders and I have taken home so many nuggets from today's conversation. I'm still receiving positive messages from our leaders. And while a lot of the questions have been covered, for the ones which we have missed out due to the shortage of time, I will come to you, sirs and ma'am, with the relevant questions. And thank you to our attendees for staying back in large numbers. Whether you would like to engage with us on our expert panel or as learners, you are invited to connect with us for membership. We're soon launching the LinkedIn for Leaders, and we will be sending out invitations to the first 1,000 across the 4 sectors. So thank you very much once again, and looking forward to more such sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.